The first question. May I respectfully ask which monks in the present time are regarded as having attained arahantship?
Well, this is a question you probably should be asking the Buddha. And the Buddha is not here, so it's a kind of perennial problem for Buddhists asking this question. I'm the same. I used to ask it when I started. But I was lucky. I found Ajahn Chah. He was my first teacher. And, I kind of struck gold. Like, that's how I looked at it. Struck gold first time. So it's like, okay, no need to look any further. So, and you can't really know, can you? Because if you're not an arahant, do you have the skills to know? I mean, if someone like me just says, oh, this person's arahant, that person's not an arahant, do you take my word? Perhaps you shouldn't do that. You should maybe educate yourself more, at least develop your practice more so you start to get an understanding of what an arahant might be like, the way they would live, the things they would do, the things they wouldn't do. And then, of course, listen to teachers, monks or nuns, and see how they practiced and how they explain the Dhamma. And if you listen to someone and you also meet them regularly, ideally you live with them or live close to them, then you get a really good idea of what they're like. And hopefully your doubts fade. So you might never know when someone is an arahant. Like Ajahn Chah, I personally believe he was an enlightened arahant. That's just my belief. Some people think he was a bodhisattva. That's their belief. And he had many great qualities which you could say fitted with a great bodhisattva, a Buddha to be. And then some people said, he's actually a bit like a mix, an arahant who's like a bodhisattva, or a bodhisattva like an arahant. So suddenly we've got a new category to deal with. That's Ajahn Chah's Bharami. He's just such an amazing figure, has had such a big impact on the Buddhist community still today, partly through his living disciples, partly through monasteries that he helped to establish or inspired to be established, and he's written and audio teachings that are still available. He's had a massive impact on Buddhist practitioners. But he'd probably be the first to say he's not the only teacher, not the only one, of course. Many others, and that's our good fortune, good karma. There have been, I would say, from my belief, my view, many well-practiced teachers in the recent era, and my area of knowledge is mainly Thailand, but I wouldn't say there aren't well-practiced monks and nuns in other Buddhist countries, particularly in Southeast Asia or South Asia. But the whole point is, there's a sangha of people practicing in the world. There has been and there still is. There'll always be, as long as people are practicing keeping the Vinaya, putting the Noble Eightfold Path into practice and developing, the world won't be free from arahants. That's what the Buddha said. So, as I said, I was fortunate. I struck gold first time and saw Ajahn Chah, read his teaching, went to live with him, and I haven't been disappointed. Ajahn Chah has many great disciples who are still living. We try to invite them here when we can. So just go through the list of monks who have lived with Ajahn Chah who are still alive, because they're obviously getting less and less. But you'll find many good monks in there. Exactly who's an arahant? Well, only an arahant is really going to know, because they're going to know their mind whether it's totally free from suffering and attachment. Are we able to know? Perhaps there's a few special people who could know, like, occasionally they say a Devata knows that a monk is becoming an arahant. How would the Devata who is not an arahant know that? Well, perhaps that Deva has some special bharami, some special insight. Because arahants don't walk around saying, I'm an arahant. Anyone who does that is probably not an arahant. That's your first red flag. anyone is making claims, I'm this, I'm that, is probably not what they're thinking. They're just deluded. As a general thing, I would say that. But in the history of Buddhism, there have been one or two people who have been seen to have been able to see or know others, whether they're enlightened or not. So there was one lady who lived with Luang Por Man, who was an 8-precept practitioner whose meditation was very good. And she used to sit and meditate, there's all the monks there, and some of those monks were probably arahants. Luang Por Phan and Luang Por Juan and Luang Por this and Luang Por that. Many monks in the Ajahn tradition would be sitting there meditating, and this lady with, I guess, a few other lay people would be there as well, meditating. And they say she would know where the monks were at in their practice. And obviously her own practice was very well developed. And all the monks knew that, so they're a little bit careful around her, because she would know who's thinking too much about the world, too much greed, lust, anger, who's actually a genuine arahant. She would know. And sometimes she'd tell the senior monk, like Luang Por Man. So you never know, there may be somebody very well developed in the background somewhere that you just missed. There's a few arahants around who people have missed over the generations. They're just quiet, self-contained, secluded, living in seclusion, and maybe their disciples and friends know, and no one else knows. And you meet people like that, monks and nuns I've met, who are very well practiced, and nobody else knows about them. No biographies and no YouTube clips and no big announcements that they're arahants, and yet they're still there. You remember, an arahant has got no more sense of self, so they don't have a self to promote. So sometimes they are very quiet and reclusive, because that's also part of the lifestyle, isn't it? If you really want to free your mind from defilement, it takes time. You can't spend all your time going out into the world. Even as a Dhamma teacher, you have to be careful, because you need the time to practice for yourself as well. So, I don't think I'm going to get into naming names, but just that, the Thai forest tradition has had a lot of very good monks. The ones I knew, Ajahn Chah obviously, and then Ajahn Mahabua was always considered to be an arahant, and I lived with him many times, looked after him many times, and was fortunate once he actually told me how he got enlightened. So I guess that's, and not in the sense, I am enlightened. He didn't sit, it wasn't like that. He sat down and he explained the practice from start to finish, and then the night of his final attaining of the path and fruit of arahant, what he did and how his mind was. He did explain that. And in the end, that's probably how you might know an arahant, isn't it? If from listening to their explanation of how they practiced and then living with them. And if you are a meditator, maybe you've got some skill in meditation, you understand your own mind, or maybe you can understand some or all of what they're talking about, and then you can make perhaps a good guess. But in the end, the Buddha said, what did the Buddha say? Pachatang veditabo vinyuhi. The wise know for themselves. It's a personal understanding. It's not something you can just tell other people or pass on to other people. You have to know for yourself through the practice. So I'll leave it with you. Maybe these days you can try Google it. Who's an arahant? I don't know, I've never done that, but maybe you could try it.
Sadhu Lumpur. The next question. Dear Lumpur, there are certain questions which the Buddha does not answer because they do not help us in our path, like, is this life finite or infinite? Or, is there an eternal soul, etc.? Does Nibbana fall into the same category? If it is experiential and not easily put into words, should we avoid discussion of the topic and concentrate on the acquisition of Sila, Samadhi and Panya and let Nibbana arise spontaneously? Thank you.
I don't think you need to avoid discussion on the topic. Sometimes it's helpful to study the suttas, the Vinaya, the Abhidhamma, the Tripitaka, and see what information is there. Definitions, inferences, anything that may give you clues and ideas where you're heading to in the practice. I wouldn't say avoid discussion of that. Sometimes we study and we listen to the words, and also sometimes from living teachers. As I said, nobody is likely to say, I have attained Nibbana or something like that. But they may give you all kinds of useful information about how they practiced and how they've dealt with different defilements, attachments, the causes of suffering, how they've experienced the cessation of suffering, what's worked. Whether that's from the suttas, the words of the Buddha, or from living teachers. You can use that to get some idea of where you're heading in the practice. And then, of course, you reflect on it yourself. But what I think we're talking about here is like, yes, Nibbana is something you have to know through the heart, the mind. You can't describe it perfectly through words. Words can't do that because they're still conventional reality and they never do justice. And they can also be a cause for great contention, arguments, disagreements, and so on. So you have to know Nibbana through your practice. But I like Lumpur Buddhadasa's reflection that you can know a little Nibbana. And he's just trying to help us, because when you start, you need help, don't you, in your practice, and you need some guidance and some encouragement. So he'd say, look for the little Nibbanas, those little moments where your suffering ceases in a situation. Suffering will cease partly just because, luckily, dukkha in all its different kinds and forms, suffering in all its forms, is inconstant. It's not self. It arises, it ceases. I mean, the Buddha said that all there is suffering arising and ceasing. You can be mindful of that, so you can notice suffering cease. You may not have done much other than just become aware of it ceasing, but that's something, isn't it? And it gives you a sense, maybe this can be ceasing permanently, no more suffering. That would be good. And then the more you become mindful of your own personal suffering, whether it's a pain in your body that fades, a mental state of unhappiness, stress, worry, whatever, anger, fading, you can be mindful of that, you can know that, and say, this is a moment of cessation, this is a little Nibbana. So that will be going on all day anyway, whether you're mindful of it or not, but as soon as you become more mindful and pay attention, then it becomes part of the path and the practice, and you can see, if I can join up these moments of cessation, and I can really make some kind of final cessation where anger arises, passes away, and doesn't arise again, that may be something very important and good. So I don't think there's any problem with discussing Nibbana, but I wouldn't just dwell on it. These endless discussions, trying to work it out logically, verbally. There's also a downside to the disadvantage to it, is you can spend a lot of time and energy writing a thesis on Nibbana and comparing all notes of all teachers and all the commentators and the Buddha on Nibbana, and there may be some benefit from that, but in the end, you've got to practice it and realize it. So you need to have a balance, don't you? And not to just become obsessed with the discussion or stuck on the discussion, especially if it's a cause for you to become rigid in your views and over-attached in certain views. And that can be a problem. So I'd get a balance, for sure. We study, we discuss, we ask questions, but we also have to practice.
Sadhu Lumpur. The next question. Greetings, Ajahn. Being the youngest daughter and raised in a Taiwanese family since little, mother only favors her only son and gave whatever valuables, including the big house, to my brother. I think this is unfair. How should I contemplate this?
I think I've had this question before. I don't know if it's from you. Probably is. So that must mean my previous answer wasn't good enough. I would say just practice a lot of mudita for the brother who gets the house. That's okay, because we're not aiming, Nibbana is not getting the house, but Nibbana is letting go of the house. So maybe, this is an opportunity to let go in a challenging situation. I appreciate there may be many things that were difficult in your childhood and the relationship with parents. Okay, I understand that. But just try and use it as an opportunity to practice Dhamma. Wish your brother well, wish your parents well, so try and see the good in them, whatever good they've done, appreciate that. And if they made mistakes, forgive them for that. You can forgive anyone. Forgiveness doesn't mean to say ignorance or not knowing what they've done. It's meaning you're not dwelling with anger on what they've done. So you know what they've done, and they may have made mistakes or done things unfairly, but you're not dwelling with anger because you're hurting yourself. So if you're aiming for Nibbana, if someone else gets more than you or is treated better than you, feel happy for them who get the good things or whatever, and then let it go, because that's not the way to Nibbana, trying to fix every wrong or every injustice in the world. You do what you can, of course, but better to train your mind in Sila, Samadhi, Panya, move ahead. It won't matter to you in the long run. Your goal is not to right all wrongs and get an even distribution of wealth and have your parents love you equally with another person. You just have to accept the karma of the situation sometimes and rise above it. Go ahead through your practice.
Sadhu Lompo. The next question. Dear Lompo, how do I stop thinking about the world?
Practice meditation, mindfulness. It may not be something you can do at will, but if you develop mindfulness, meditation, and the sila and the lifestyle that supports it, that's part of it as well, then you can bring your mind to experience states of peace, stillness, emptiness, what you call samadhi. You can do that. And then you realize, I don't always have to think about the world, react to the world, worry about the world, hate the world, love the world, and all the things in the world. You don't have to all the time, because if you achieve some stillness, some samadhi, even though it's temporary, but it gives you a confidence and a knowledge that, things can stop. That thing that was bugging me before, I've let it go, at least temporarily. That thing I was obsessed with, the loves, the hates, I've gone quiet for a while. That gives you such an important insight into the way things are. You realize they're temporary, they're not that important. And also you realize you can be totally peaceful, happy, content inwardly without anything else that you have to depend on or cling on externally. It's what we call niramisa sukha. It's happiness and not dependent on any material object. You don't have to see anything or hear anything. You're just developing that through your own meditation. That gives you a really good insight into the world. So it's not Nibbana, but it's close to Nibbana, and then it helps you to get the right perspective as you're contemplating the impermanent, selfless nature of physical and mental things. So you may only experience that very briefly, occasionally, but it can be experienced, and then you get your kind of strength to keep practicing. So you do have to practice. Obviously, there's also lifestyle things, like if you spend all your time scrolling the news cycles on your phone or whatever, then you're going to keep thinking about the world, aren't you? If you keep looking for information, looking for pleasure, looking for stuff in the world, then you're going to keep thinking about it. So sometimes you also have to have like periods of quiet time where you're not on the computer with the phone, you're not talking to anyone, you're reflective and turning your attention inwards, what you might call more meditative activities, whether it's retreats or at least in the course of a day, you might have one quiet time where you meditate. You're not looking for any extra information in the world. So you also have to streamline and develop a supportive lifestyle for developing samadhi and stillness, for developing insight. So it's possible, but we have to do it. Nobody can just make your mind stop thinking about the world. That's the delusion, isn't it? You take a few pills and you will be numb to the world and stop thinking about it, or you go away to the island in the middle of the ocean and you won't have to think about the world. Well, for a little while that might happen. Then you probably start missing the world unless you're trained your mind. So actually you have to do it through mindfulness and insight. And just keep developing that. So get to know the world as it is, and then you'll tire of craving the attachment for the world, then your mind starts to drop things. So you really don't want to think about all this stuff that previously you realized caused you suffering. You can drop it because you're tired of suffering. So keep practicing and it will actually happen quite naturally.
Sadhu. Lumpur. The next question. May I ask something from my own experience? I have seen visions of Jesus twice during meditation. In one of them, he was sitting in a meditation posture similar to how I've also seen visions of the Buddha and Kuan Yin. I do not mean to cause any confusion or offense to Christians, but I wondered from your experience or understanding whether there is any connection or knowledge of Jesus having been a Buddhist.
Well, yeah, if you make a statement like that, Jesus was a Buddhist, you probably would offend a lot of people. But Jesus having been a contemplative, leading that kind of lifestyle, yeah, I mean, I would have thought the Christian texts support that idea. And it's quite possible in those days, people, including Jews, Christians, would have maybe sat down cross-legged and done something similar to what we would now call meditation. I would say that's quite possible, and certainly these days, many Christians meditate in different forms, and they may have a different understanding, different goals from Buddhism, but there's a certain similarity of technique at least, and so that's one thing I would have thought. It's quite possible that early Christians, Jesus and early Christians would have known about different meditation techniques and done that. Also quite possible that this is a sign that maybe you personally have been of Christian faith in a previous life. That's only speculation, but based on my experience, I would say that's quite possible that you've had some karma together with Christians in the past, and therefore you have such a vision. And that's okay. We all have done many things in our past. So it's just something for you to know about your own thinking, your own background, your own character, maybe. I mean, I was brought up with Christians to start with, so it's just part of life. We've had different exposure to different religions. Maybe this life, maybe previous lives.
Sadhu. Lumpur. Dear Ajahn, I thought I need to have a certain amount of savings before I can quit my job to live in a monastery. Therefore, I feel I need to have more before I can let go. Please advise if my thought is wrong.
Well, if you've identified this thought of having more, I need to have more, as a form of craving, Dhamma, yeah, it's something to be known and abandoned, isn't it? So I sympathize. I think you're a lady, and that is quite a common bit of advice females will be given, is get some kind of savings so that if you lead a spiritual or monastic style life, you need maybe some savings to help support yourself. I mean, it's not absolutely essential though. In some traditions, female practitioners in monasteries have their own store of savings so that they can look after medical care, visit home, travel, whatever. But there's also the possibility of becoming a full-blown nun where you give up all your money, just like monks. And you can give up money and wealth and just go for it and accept alms, and whatever you get, you'll live on that, and you dedicate your life fully to the Buddha, the Dhamma Vinaya. You can do that as well. So there's a number of options, I think, for you as a practitioner. If you are ready to retire from your work, I would imagine some savings might be very useful. If only you could keep those savings to a point where you're ready to abandon them and then you give them to parents or charity or a good cause. Many people do that. Or they may be useful for you if you're, say, an 8-preceptor nun or practitioner living in a monastery where you can still handle money, so you could use funds for helping with certain aspects of your life. So you have to make that decision where what you feel is appropriate for you at this time in your life and what you really want to do, what makes you feel right, what feels right, makes you feel happy, whether it's to commit to full ordination and just give up all your wealth and money and everything, or sort of half in, half out, where you're maybe a lay practitioner associated with a monastery, but you still have some funds that you can control so you can visit home or do certain things. That's for you to decide what you feel comfortable with. If you're taking a next step from your job, say you want to take early retirement or just leave your job and practice more, well, you have to think how you can achieve it, where you're going to go, what the situation will be where you're going. Is it a monastery that requires you to give up all your money or requires you to have some money to look after yourself? There's so many different formats nowadays. You have to see what your long-term plan is maybe, and then adjust your lifestyle currently to fit that or to achieve that.